G'day and welcome to the show. Last week we road tested Australia's green tree frogs, some of which make great pets. This week we've travelled to Western Australia to search for the black-headed and Woma pythons, two large and uniquely Australian snakes that have become extremely popular in the reptile keeping hobby in the last 10 years. Here in Western Australia, on the edge of the Great Sandy Desert, we have what looks like a fairly sterile landscape. Not much in the way of trees, very low scrubby vegetation, not much in the way of standing water. You would be forgiven for thinking that this landscape is not very productive, but actually you'd be wrong, because this is one of the most productive landscapes in Australia in terms of reptile fauna that there is. This is an area that hasn't been affected much by man's activities. There hasn't been a lot of ranging of cattle and sheep, there hasn't been a lot of land clearing, primarily because the main activity in this area is mining, which tends to be concentrated in small areas. The basis of the food chain in this area is this very vegetation, spinifex grass and these low shrubs. They provide food and sustenance for insects such as termites, ants, locusts, grasshoppers, that sort of thing. And those small invertebrates in turn provide food for smaller lizards, geckos, skinks, smaller snakes, goannas, which in turn provide food for birds of prey. Luckily, the West Australian government have been foresighted enough to actually license a few people, a select number of people, to legally harvest reptiles from the wild in order to supply the pet industry. There are some very nice species that are allowed. We're going to go and meet a licensed collector who lives in this area, David McIntosh, who has an operation called Pilbara Pythons.
Yeah, he's nice. Looks like a yearling.
Dave does most of his collecting during the summer, when reptiles are active. We went out into the remote Pilbara Range to one of his favourite black-headed python hunting grounds.
Okay, we're in a location here at Indy Station in the middle of the Pilbara. We're trying to find a black-headed python. It's a good chance of seeing it. It's nice and sunny. There's a pretty good area for them. I've seen them here before.
Some of the termite mounds in this area are 10 feet tall and probably over 100 years old.
And it's not just reptiles you find in here as well. You get a lot of little marsupials and anacondas and things. Hey Ryan, why don't you start on some of those termite mounds over there and have a look. Just sneak around, because if a snake's going to shoot in if it sees you, so just start around here and work your way there and see how you go. Yell out if you see anything.
Throughout the dry country, reptiles are strongly associated with termite mounds that provide shelter and the basis for a food chain. In Western Australia, licensed collectors are required to provide information about the date, time and location of all specimens taken from the wild. Only reptiles from the permitted list are allowed to be taken. Those considered to be rare or in any way vulnerable cannot be harvested.
There's one over there. It's a little fella. And he's a beauty too. He wants to buy it. And he's full of bluff. Okay, here's a little female by the look of it. Although it's quite pretty, it's not a very good conditioned one. Should be, I would expect a lot more condition on a snake this time of year, considering all the rain and the good food around, but nonetheless, quite a pretty specimen. Blackheads are quite easy to tell the sex of visually. You can even see it from a distance. The males have a hemipenal bulge here. This one's got a concave shape. It's definitely a female. Hey Ryan, bring us a bag over and the form so I can get a GPS on it. All right, hold the bag open. Okay, just that form. What's today's date? 8th, isn't it?
Yep.
Okay, part of our licensing requirements is that we supply a GPS, so. Okay. See what else we can find.
With a nice blackhead in the bag, we set off in search of a Woma python. Like black-headed python, womas are generally nocturnal and take shelter in burrows during the day.
See any tracks around it? Yes. Yeah, that's a lizard, so you can tell by the claw marks. This is more what we're looking for. Yeah, these are tracks. Around here. Yeah, look, see? Typical snake tracks. See the slide marks, and there's no actual paw marks there.
They can be tracked by their slide marks in the sand.
There's a burrow there. We should investigate that, I think. Okay, when you're digging these burrows, Ryan, the important thing to do is not to collapse on itself so you don't lose the hole. Because that sometimes happens, especially in moist soil. Although this is pretty dry. Alright, so you put it in there and start excavating on top of the stick. Okay, just hopefully it's not a king brown in here.
Although it can sometimes be difficult to distinguish between an active and a disused burrow.
There he is. Oh, mate. Okay, we've got a gale here. We're going to have to excavate that nest and make sure that there isn't eggs in there. Okay, go on, get out. Good.
All the reptiles Dave collects are then taken back to his premises to be processed according to his license conditions.
Okay, part of our quarantined license conditions is we must quarantine any animal that comes out of the bush for minimum of 21 days. And that gives us a good opportunity to treat these things for like reptiles for parasites and get them feeding and things like that. So we'll give this a quick worm out, but I'll need some assistance. I'll just get my young fella. Ryan, come in. Okay, we're going to weigh this and give it a worm out, all right? So just reset your scales. Okay, pass them up. Her up. Okay, 870. Okay, now we've given it a dose of worm out. We're just going to let it settle in for the night. So we're just going to get a water dish and set it up and put it in the rack and see how it settles. Ryan, can you please arrange water dish, some water? We'll follow up in another 6 weeks of second dose of worm out, and that'll kill any eggs that's been missed and give it one last dose of flagellite. And yeah, we'll decide within that quarantine period whether we want to keep this snake or let another dealer take care of it or export it to a private keeper outside of WA, which we're entitled to do.
This is a typical summer day. It's about probably over 40 degrees. So it's not an easy area to work in. It's not very comfortable in the summer. But at night the temperature does drop quite significantly. Of course 40 degrees is not a comfortable operating temperature for reptiles, and in fact it would be fatal to most of them pretty quickly. On summer's days they're usually active in the early morning. They come out and bask in the sun and warm up to operating temperature, which is probably around 30, and then they begin their foraging and feeding activity. Then they go and retire to the numerous rock outcrops and hide under slabs of rock and in the cracks. And then in the late afternoon they become active again. So it's not a very comfortable place for people to work, but reptiles have adapted to this environment by getting out of the sun during the hottest hours of the day. And of course that is a strategy used by reptiles all over the world. Another interesting python to be found in this region is the Pilbara Olive. It differs from the common olive python by reaching a greater maximum size. In fact, it may actually be Australia's largest python, with some individuals growing over 6 meters long. This species is currently not permitted to be kept.
Yeah, this area here is pretty good for Barren olives. We're in the Ord Ranges here, and this place is famous for its tiger eye rock. And they actually mine it not far from here, which is a bit of a shame. They earmarked this place as well. I've often found barrenoi around these bases of these tiger iron rocks, so see how we go. We might be lucky today. Oh, there's one. Awesome. Little fella. Come on, mate. Yeah. Little boy. Olive python's found right across the top end of Australia. However, this is the subspecies known as the Pilbara Olive barrenoi. Get some truly big specimens here in the Ord Ranges. I've seen quite a few of them. They've got a beautiful temperament, and they've got a lower mid-body count across the scales, and these were described in 1981. Unfortunately, we're not allowed to keep these, so I'll have to put them back. It's a bit of a pity, really, because they would do well in captivity. There you go, mate.
While still in the Pilbara, we drove some unsealed roads after sunset and turned up a rare and attractive species of death adder called the black-headed death adder.
Oh, look. Ah, we've got a black-headed adder. How cool is that? That's undoubtedly my favourite species of death adder. How awesome. Ryan, bring me a bag. Gonna take him. Yeah. Okay, this adder here is what I consider to be the holy grail of death adders in Australia. It's called the Pilbara death adder. We get two adders around here, but this is the Pilbara death adder. Totally unique to WA. It's highly sought after in the pet industry at the moment, but unfortunately there's not many in captivity. We're lucky enough to have a few, and this little female we add to the collection, and we're quite confident of breeding them this year. In fact, I think I've got one gravid at the moment, so yeah. Stunning animal.
I don't recommend keeping venomous snakes as pets, but if you choose to do so, death adders are one of the more manageable species. Being ambush predators, they appear somewhat sluggish, but they can strike with lightning speed and should always be treated with the utmost caution. Death adders give birth to live young, as we witnessed when Dave's gravid female produced a litter of 10 healthy babies. The birthing process takes about half an hour, and the newborns use their egg tooth to break free of the membrane in which they are born. This newborn is yawning to clear its airways prior to taking its first few breaths of air. The babies receive no further care or protection from the mother. They are able to inflict a venomous bite from birth, and they will feed primarily on lizards and frogs for the first year, and then move on to larger prey, including small mammals. On our return trip that evening, we came across a large female black-headed python crossing the road.
Oh yep, big old blackhead. How cool is that? Well, you kids want to get out and have a look?
At 6 feet long, this was one of the largest wild blackheads Dave has found in this area, and luckily for him, closer examination revealed that it was in fact gravid or carrying eggs.
Look at that. Beautiful. Hold my torch. What, are you scared, Jake?
In captivity, black-headed pythons will mate in the early spring. Males should be left in with females until all signs of mating cease, and they should then be removed. Females that have become gravid will refuse food and begin to grow considerably heavier towards the back end of the body. They will shed their skin, and then about a month later they will lay their eggs. About 8 eggs is average for the species, although very large specimens may produce more. Most keepers will incubate the eggs artificially, and they will hatch about 2 months later. This baby is twisting to break free of the umbilical cord, which is still attaching it to the egg. There are several colour varieties of the black-headed python being developed in Australia. Random mutations give rise to small differences in colour and pattern, which are then enhanced through selective breeding by keepers. These two blackheads both show colour differences that have promise for further development. Womas undergo a similar breeding cycle and also produce relatively large eggs. We spoke to Woma breeder Chris Williams about his interest in the species.
Woma is one of my favourite snakes. I've been keeping them for many years. They're a good snake for the first time keeper as well. They don't get too large, probably 4 or 5 foot would be around the average size. And they're an easy snake to keep. They don't require really anything too out of the ordinary to maintain them. And now that we know how to breed them, they're pretty easy to breed. And most people keeping Womas these days would be producing babies without too much effort at all. Found right across the top end of Australia. They're in Queensland, Northern Territory, Western Australia and South Australia. Most of the ones available in captivity seem to be from either the Northern Territory or Western Australia. I live in a 2-bedroom unit in Sydney, so I don't have a great deal of space to be able to keep a lot of animals, which is what I want to do. This cage system I got from a company called Freedom Breeder in America and had it shipped over. It allows me to keep a relatively large amount of animals in a small area, and they're really good cages. They're designed for commercial reptile breeders in America, and it means they can farm tens of thousands of animals. For my modest collection, it means that they can all be kept in really good condition. The moulded plastic tubs mean that there's no corners, and when you can clean the whole thing out really well. And they're heated with a heat strip at the back of the rack, so the animal's got a lot of space to decide whether it wants to be sitting right on the hot spot or to be sitting up the front and getting away from the heat as much as it can. Probably my favourite. She's a Rockhampton Downs Woma from Western Australia. She's quite unusual for a Woma in that she's lacking these characteristic bands across most of her body. You can see she's got this lovely ventral stripe which runs all the way down, but most Womas have got strong bands, and what I'm hoping to do is put her with a similar looking animal over the next 12 months and hopefully one day produce a Woma which has just got this one uniform pattern running the length of the body. When I first got the rack system, I played around with different substrates, and I used butcher's paper and kitty litter and aspen bedding. I found newspaper to probably be the easiest. It allows you to really keep the cage nice and clean. Whenever the animal fouls the area, you can clean the whole thing out in a really short space of time, and it just means that the snake's going to be kept in a really hygienic environment. And this is another Woma from Western Australia. This is more, I guess, the typical pattern which you'll find on a Woma. Those are distinct bands running down the length. You see that this one has got fairly high contrasting patterns, which is pretty good for one of these snakes, and it's more characteristic of the ones found in Western Australia. The ones from the Northern Territory, this guy's trying to get away. The ones from the Northern Territory don't seem to have such a contrasting pattern. As you saw with the Womas, they're a great snake, and they're easy to hold, and they like being held, but when they smell food, it's a different story. This female that was so friendly a few moments ago, at the smell of food, might act somewhat different. Now she's got a mouthful, I can I can move her around again, but as you can see, she's hell-bent on killing the rat. And a rat that size for a Woma will last her for about a week, and during the cooler months she won't be eating at all. And here's the boy. Let's see if he's hungry as well. Oh, he wasn't paying attention. Here we go. He's worked out what's going on now. He tends to be a little bit more delicate in the way he feeds to the female. Oh, not this time. Recently, one of my females from the Northern Territory laid a clutch of 10 good eggs. This year I decided to try something different with the incubation. Normally, most people had been using vermiculite as the substrate for many years, and prior to that, sphagnum was also tried. These days now, people are tending more to have the eggs suspended outside of any medium. And what I mean by that is they'll be resting on a grid, a plastic grid or wire mesh, and they'll be supported above a substrate like perlite, which will just be filled with water. And that means that you don't have to worry about getting measurements correct. You can just measurements between water and the medium that you're using. These days you can just support the eggs on top of the mesh, and it means that there's one less variable that you have to worry about during the incubation process. So this is the first year that I've been trying the perlite, and I must say it's working really well.
Chris spends most of the money he earns from breeding snakes on his other passion, collecting reptile books. And he has a collection dating back over 200 years.
One aspect of book collecting which has changed in recent times is with the internet, books that we thought were quite common have proved to be quite rare, like this one. I purchased it for $100 about 15 years ago, and it's now selling for upwards of $20,000. Another one of my favourites is this book by John White, who was the surgeon during the first fleet to Australia. The pictures in here are some of the first ever of Australian animals, and this is the first ever picture of a blue-tongued lizard. So it's quite amazing to think that this book would have travelled back to England, and this would have been their first glimpse of things like a lace monitor, one of the common lizards that you'll see in the Sydney area, or the most common of the goannas that you'll see around Sydney.
The road test for this episode produced the following scores. For the black-headed python, hatchlings go for about $1,000 each, so on price I gave them a score of 4. Availability. The black-headed python is now regularly bred in captivity, so a 6 seems right here. Getting juveniles to feed can present some challenges, but once they are going, blackheads present few maintenance problems, a score of 6. Being a tropical snake, blackheads require year-round heat, so power bills will be slightly higher than for the Woma, a score of 5 for garaging. Will conveniently eat frozen thawed food, so a 9 in the fuel category. Wow factor. Some of the larger geographical variants of the black-headed python can exceed 2.5 meters and are impressive beasts. There are also some interesting patterns and colors being developed, so a wow factor score of 6 seems right here, giving a total score of 36. For the Woma python, at about $500, they are half the price of a blackhead, so a score of 5 on price seems fair. Availability. Woma pythons are more frequently and easily bred than blackheads, so a score of 7 in this category. Maintenance. Womas are very easy to maintain, a score of 6. Garaging. Like blackheads, Woma pythons are restless captives and will rearrange cage decorations that are not attached. They can tolerate quite a bit of cooling during winter, a score of 6. On fuel, they will conveniently eat frozen thawed food, so a 9 in the fuel category. Wow factor. Some of the emerging selectively bred colour morphs are indeed impressive, so a score of 6 seems appropriate here, giving an overall score of 39.